All right, so I am Demetrius Malbrough, Cloud Advocate, right here at Veritas, and I am joined by two fantastic panelists. I have Dr. Professor Sally Eaves.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Thank you.
And also Chris Wiborg.
Hi, guys.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about 360 defense in the age of AI. And everyone's already talking about artificial intelligence. I'm sure you watched the keynote this morning as well. But we're going to start off by asking around the cybersecurity skills gap, because it's very important that we continue to maintain the skills in order to protect our environments, especially in the age of AI. So, Sally, why don't you kick us off there?
Absolutely lovely to be here, first of all. Great day so far. And for me, I think skills gaps is right up there. We talk about technology, the latest advancements, but if we don't pair that with investment in skills and skills uplift, we get left further behind. So I think massively key when it comes to generative AI in particular. There's a lot of misunderstandings. You know, we use the same terms quite often for different things. I think for me, with Gen AI in particular, it's almost as if there's only one flavor, to use the analogy of like a recipe or something like that. And it isn't just ChatGPT, for example, it's Llama 2, there's different variations. So it comes back to me about education and going back to data as a differentiator. So for example, with AI, it's the right model pairing with the right data. It's not separate conversations.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, look, skills shortage, I mean, that's why we're all here, right, at this show, is to kind of uplift our skills and develop them further. And it's in multiple areas. I think AI is just one of them. That's the new game in town, as it were, right? But fundamental cloud skills, fundamental security skills, and I think what I've seen is organizations trying to, in the true sense of DevSecOps, like, we haven't gotten that right yet, right? And so the people that have all those skills are unicorns. So for all of you, depending on where you come from, it's probably how do you work together with others that have the complementary skills for your organization to succeed in being better at security and resilience,
right,
being better at being able to move forward with AI innovation, and I think importantly, make sure that when you're doing things with data and AI, you're doing it in a way that's compliant and secure, and right, ideally ethical, right? As well as just learning how to do it, which is where I think many companies are today. I mean, how many of you out there have like a defined AI strategy for your company? Okay, how many people feel they need to have one? Yeah, so see the gap, right? This is kind of where we are. Right?
And can I come back in on that as well,
absolutely.
if that's
Go
okay?
right
But I think that's another key theme, and we saw it in the presentation just now a little bit as well, but there are a lot of these intention action gaps that we're seeing, and we see it in lots of the research surveys. For example, awareness of how important cybersecurity is, but then when it looks at things like visibility, etc., we haven't got that in place. So we've got this across the board. Education is another one, and it comes back to different forms of literacy. So supporting that, and for example, data uplift, skills literacy for every role in the organization. We talk about cybersecurity, shared responsibility. If you don't pair that with the right education for every single role, how are you ever going to overcome that? So it's the right complementary strengths with some of the technology I know we're talking about today, but also the right human investment as well, side by side.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's people, processes, tools, all the above, right, that need to come together.
Absolutely, it is. And since we're on this topic, so cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, so tell me, what do you think are, or maybe your opinion, around some of the uses of artificial intelligence when it comes to being more resilient and helping to protect around cyber threats, things like ransomware, etc.?
Perfect. Okay, I'll go for two angles, if I may.
Okay.
So first one, going back to education, I think use of AI for personalized education and training. So there's something called metacognition, and it's kind of like gym for your brain in many ways. I much prefer that, to be honest with you, but it kind of helps you identify your learning style. So with all the noise, with all the need to know more and the speed of change and scale of that, AI can be used there to help you identify your learning strengths and kind of cut through some of that. So there's definitely an education link that I think is underexplored. I think personalized training across organizations, one of the biggest differences we can make. But the second one is definitely around use of supporting the overload we have in ops around cybersecurity. It's that management to get more proactive, active intelligence, looking at the threat noise, looking at the lost threats that we're not seeing. There's a lost security cost there too. So it's complementary strengths working together, being more proactive to the right role, right time. So it's hugely important, but it's not one replacing the other.
Yeah, and I'll take another angle, right? So I think, as you guys know, AI is used by the bad actors as well. How do I make my phishing emails more personalized, more human? And that's the easiest point of attack. So they're using it on their side. So folks like us at Veritas, we have to use it on our side. And we do that to try and use AI to do things like anomaly detection. And not just against a data time series, which is kind of like table stakes these days, yeah? But also around administrative behaviors. So sometimes it's actually an admin trying to like log in again and again and again. They just like forgot the password. But sometimes that's a form of attack. And those compromised credentials are something that people go after as well. So within our product set, we use AI ourselves to help solve the problem. We don't do it on our own. But that's an additional signal that we can share with a partner that's a SIM SOAR vendor. There are plenty of good ones out on the floor here to talk to. And then they can get that lens in addition to the things they might be seeing from endpoints, network, et cetera, to do a correlation, say, hey, this is actually not a false positive. There's a real something going on here, and you need to pay attention to it.
So, you want to add to that?
I was going to say about compliance actually as well.
Yeah.
So use of AI there. So many different geographical differences. Again, huge speed and scale of change. Differences across different parts of the world. Again, like with NIST, with GDPR, DORA, etc. as well. The speed of change there is very complicated, and supporting organisations automatically being aware of certain updates and when certain data will be in scope of that, I think is key too. So I think AI in terms of governance and compliance is huge as well. And what you're doing there.
Remember the days, I mean, I'm going to date myself, but people used to do like metadata tagging by hand. Remember that?
Really?
Right? Oh yeah. Well, so today, if simple things like, hey, are there patterns recognizable PII in your data?
Yep.
Wouldn't it be great if you knew that? So that before an attack ever occurred, you identified that, you did the classification, and you could actually then know, I was going to say if, but typically when you're attacked these days, unfortunately, you knew what actions to take. You don't want to be figuring that out in the midst of a war room scramble, right? Trying to respond and bring your enterprise back up. You know it ahead of time, so you can, for example, tell your legal team, do you need to send out letters to consumers or customers telling them there's been a breach, right? And so I think insight into the data is another form of AI that has direct correlation to the importance of governance as part of your overall cyber resilience strategy, paired up with what you do on the data protection and data security side. We kind of believe it at Veritas, and for those of you who hear Varun's presentation, that's what that 360 defense architecture is all about, bringing those three disciplines together to get a more holistic look at what's going on before, during, and then of course after an attack, where companies like Veritas, we've been doing that for years, helping you bring back the data. But at some level, that's the easy part, believe it or not, these days.
Yeah, I actually love that. You mentioned before, during, and after an attack, because we know it's going to happen. And it might not be ransomware, but it might be something else. Could be double extortion, exfiltration. Something's going to happen. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that the lovely people sitting in the audience can do maybe before an attack happens.
Yeah, I'll jump back in on that, right? So let's go back to the thread I was just on around classification. One of the things you can do is also understand, is data overexposed?
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure nobody has developers that go do stuff in cloud with data that maybe shouldn't be there.
Shadow IT.
It happens, and so how do you find that out and proactively remediate that situation, whether it's putting better access controls around it or candidly removing or deleting that data, and in some cases, depending on what it is, maybe repatriating it back into the enterprise as opposed to having it in the cloud. I mean, all those are possible answers, but the key is knowing what you got. What do you have? Where is it? And importantly, what's in it down at that level so you can properly govern it and know how to respond when things do go sideways.
Nice.
I'd agree with that totally in terms of like visibility, complexity, integration being right up there as key challenges. I'd also say look back as part of the looking forward as well, because we're seeing lots of very bad actors coming together and collaborating and kind of reimagining old threats. So Emotet would be an example of that, for example. But also old protocols are being reused as new gateways in to make a security threat. So I have a CTO background in telecoms. One example of that would be some of the old S7 protocols there. People think they're kind of 70s, not being used anymore. Actually, they were really weak link, and they were combined with crypto and some of the rise acceleration of interest there, hacking crypto wallets of major CEOs. So again, there's some of these threats aren't dead, and a lot of people are reimagining them at the moment too. So a lot of creativity, I would say, in the bad actors. So we have to match that kind of with the good guys, don't we?
Well, and we see wave after wave after wave of technology, from 3-tier to VM to containers, right? And each time there's a change, there's new opportunities for innovation, there's new opportunities for attack. And so how do you make sure that you cover the spectrum of whatever you've got under management to be able to ensure that in addition to popping back up your infrastructure, which may be self-healing, for example, depending on how you're doing it, you also can do that with the data. So the data has to be as resilient as your infrastructure. If you're just doing part of that, you're kind of missing out on solving the problem. And again, this is where companies like Veritas can help.
Yeah. Now, how many of you in the audience are using ChatGPT? 1, 2? Okay. How many of you are building your own large language models so you can keep that privacy data and tap into your own analytics? 1, 2, 1? Okay. So as you're doing that, so let's talk about maybe one of the implications and some of the ethical concerns just around building large language models and making sure that you're doing it in an ethical fashion, you're keeping it secure, et cetera. So, because I think that's a really hot topic right now.
Absolutely. One thing that reminds me when you mentioned that too, linking it back to kind of diversity and inclusion in this sector as well. I think when we talk about ethical development and AI, often we talk about it from the algorithm lens, don't we, if you see what I mean? But actually there's a human side of this too. I think the latest count is 183 or something human biases that have been identified. So another big thing, going back to that first question about why this matters so much, you need diverse teams in security. It could be your secret weapon because you need to get into those different perspectives and points of view. So I want to mention that firstly. So part of doing this in the right way, the diverse teams that make up the building is incredibly important. So I want to kind of put that front and center, really.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think, what was interesting, and I'll give kudos to AWS talking about this in the keynote this morning, data is going to be your differentiation when it comes to training your models, too.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think, how do you, again, with insight into your data, make sure that you're doing your best, and this is assuming corporate guidelines and ethics and policy support this direction, to eliminate as much bias as you can, right? And in addition to the regulatory things that you may have to address, HIPAA and other PII issues.
GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
CCPA.
Data sovereignty.
PCI. The list goes on, right?
Exactly. And so having that insight and governance in your data, and then I'll put one more thing that we've been thinking about and talking to customers at Veritas about is what's the first thing you need to do when you're training a model? You need to assemble all your data together.
Yeah.
You need to dedupe it, and then you need to scrub it of information that doesn't make sense to be there. And so CSPs have one way to approach that. Mostly they cover their domain. Our experiences is most organizations, your data estate is bigger than that. You have a lot of stuff on-prem too. In fact, that's maybe where your more proprietary data lives. And so because we have eyes and ears into what's going on in the cloud and what's happening on-premise or at the edge, when you protect your data, when you back it up, you got a copy of all that.
Right.
So imagine if you got a copy of all that, and then you deduped it, and then you cleansed it. And sort of Sally and I were joking about this before, sort of Maslow's hierarchy of building and training your AI models. Companies like us play a very important role to helping take that first step, right? And then you can take those data sets and feed them into the SageMakers and eventually the Qs and so on of the world, right? At the foundation, we play a really important role. And so that's a massive opportunity that we'd love to talk to you guys more about.
And also, what are some of the ways that artificial intelligence can be used, especially, so let's talk post-attack. So after an attack has happened, what are some of the ways that artificial intelligence can be used in order to maybe speed that recovery up or maybe provide more confidence, et cetera? I want to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to where we started with the skills piece. All the assist and or co-pilot notions out there, right? The AI, we talk about personas a lot in my job in marketing, and we've been talking for years about this guy named Backup Bob, right? Well, these are the specialists, and the phrase that we have internally is Backup Bob is retiring, right? There's real specialists. So how do you infuse that best practice and that knowledge? Can you use AI, just like you saw today in the keynote again, to help developers write code? How do you use it to help the operations teams to do the right thing by making suggestions based upon patterns, either within an organization or in some cases pulled from many different organizations together in a model that helps you close the skills gap, do the right thing, and protect your organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it helps that prioritization aspect with all those different things you have to handle when that situation occurs. It helps you filter that
what do I
dramatically.
bring back first is an important thing.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like we talked about with mindsets as well in terms of security, but also business continuity. It's bringing all these elements together. But I think also just when we're talking here today as well, it also brings us in, we've got 360 behind us, haven't we? The holism of approach we need here as well. So the technology that we've been talking about in terms of AI, the skills training, but also the right change management process. So we're trying to be more agile to situations like this. For example, CI/CD is really appropriate for that type of technique. But again, you need to support people in that journey. The right AI ops teams, bringing together people from engineering, different diverse experiences, that all helps too. So we have to look at these things in a very integrated way, I think, to make the best results.
Yeah, I totally agree.
No, go ahead if you...
No, I'm just
Okay.
big +1 to what Sally said.
And just to let everyone know, I will, jump in anytime. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll ask a question for you. All right. So continuing to talk about artificial intelligence, and I know most of you said that either you're using ChatGPT already, you're building your own large language models, etc. But I really want to find out from you, as far as artificial intelligence is concerning, what are you using it for? Are you using it to maybe do your job better from a DevOps perspective or from an implementation perspective? Maybe hear from some of you guys a little bit later on around what you're doing for it. Now, Sally, I know you may want to talk a little bit about blockchain and cryptocurrencies and maybe some of the implications around security from that perspective, because we were talking over there and you said something interesting, so I think that would make for a great conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean, A is such an area of interest, isn't it, at the moment, that the hype around this area always attracts, it's like anything, like with COVID, more attacks from a health-based point of view. Same thing with crypto, big acceleration at the moment, so we've got an increase of attacks there too. But I mentioned earlier, like use of old protocols in a way to get in there. I think the other thing we've seen is a lot of phishing attacks around blockchain and crypto. So, so attacking the people who are representing a particular program or coin or whatever it might be, and representing their organization and getting people in there. I've had personal experience because I've done a lot of kind of keynotes and things in blockchain. I've done a lot with the UN on blockchain for social impact. I had something on Instagram very recently where someone is trying to use that approach to kind of be me in terms of conversation. So it's so many different levels, and the hype around it attracts the attention. So it's a massive issue at the moment.
Scary.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just tie it back to data is the heart of your apps, whether you're using blockchain or whatever.
Okay.
And your apps are the heart of your organization these days, right? Every business is a digital business, so make sure your data is safe and recoverable and resilient. Because despite all the great things that a lot of companies out here will help you do on the prevention side, things inevitably go sideways. So what do you do then? And importantly, and we haven't talked about this enough maybe, like how do you plan for that and drill and be ready for it? So it's not day of, you're figuring it out, right?
Yeah.
Can I come in on that one as well? Because I think like the simulation side of this is hugely important. So again, education and giving confidence. It's not just access to training. You need to have the opportunity to kind of use that in action, like experientially. So we've seen a lot of things done well where you simulate that attack and everybody knows what their roles and responsibilities are. From the communications team, not just a text team, it's everybody. It's that shared responsibility. But if you not practice that and get through that process ahead of time and do it regularly, it's like once a year checklist or something like that. It has to be an ongoing part of things. So the simulation of when something goes wrong before it does, I think, is massive.
Yeah, I mean, at Veritas, we've talked to customers for years that, I'll go back to Backup Bob, right? They have a 5-hour recovery time objective, RTO.
Yep.
That's candidly the easy part. It's all this coordination between different teams that leads to how long it takes to actually come back. And it's unlike dealing with an executive deleting something by mistake, or even a flood or a meteor strike, right? These things are more clear path as to what you need to do. Oh, you do all these things, you bring the data back, you mop up after the flood. Well, when you're dealing with a cyber attack, it's very, very different. You can't just take the data and restore it back to production and say, we're good, right? You got to put it in an isolated environment, do the forensics against it, make sure that it hasn't been tampered with, and know, again, the order of operations in which you bring things back.
Right, yeah.
You can bring the data back, but if you haven't brought back your AD forest yet, for example, and that's been messed with, actually, in bringing back the data and then just turning that on, you open up more holes.
Yeah.
Right? And then, of course, it's an adaptive attacker that's coming after you. It's not a static event.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot more things you have to think about. It's a different approach to dealing with another type of data disaster, where the data is, human with AI assist on the other side.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people have large Windows environments in the audience, right? So you need to make sure that you have a capability that can actually help you recover your Active Directory, because bad guys, they're going to go after that. So go ahead, Sally. I know you want
I was going to say, because your research recently, I think, was saying 73 days, wasn't it? The average time now to recover. So really
that
echoes.
was actually an IBM security report.
Yeah. Your article was
and
mentioned.
the 73
Huge.
days is not the 5-hour RTO. That's like the last step in the longer chain of making sure that SecOps, IT ops, all working together. Gosh, sometimes it's your board members checking in on how's it going?
Yep.
And making sure your comms plan is in place, and then doing the right thing step by step to recover from a different type of disaster.
And also just practicing is your way of approaching that right as well.
So important.
A friend of mine works at the NTSB, and I think we've all seen some of those programs. You look at what happens when something goes wrong, and you're in that cockpit environment, for example, and there's a checklist, isn't there? And in certain scenarios, you need to do that in maybe a different order, and it's only in things of practice you realise what the true priority is, and that's my analogy of that. We've seen that situation.
A paper playbook is not enough.
Exactly.
You got to do the testing and the drills.
So what are some maybe automated, orchestrated ways that those in the audience can simulate and help their business be ready for when that thing happens, right?
I mean, obvious tabletop exercises.
Okay.
But then beyond that, there are some vendors like us that provide tooling to do the non-intrusive testing. So it's actually using the real data, but then restoring to a different environment, making sure it works, and then making sure that you've got that orchestration plan automated. So again, you're not going to Bob needs to go do this, and then Sally needs to go this, and then Demetrius needs to do that.
Right.
It's actually run in an automated fashion.
Okay.
I'd also say look for new opportunity to skill and upskill and outreach as well. So again, it goes back to the skills gaps and things too. But as one example, I'm involved in a hackathon at the moment that I've put together. As part of that, you're using security software. You're mimicking attacks. This is financial services kind of point of sale attacks, but it gets you in those roles. And again, it kind of brings it to a new audience about this as a career too. And you're learning and you're getting rewarded as you go. So that's another way to kind of look at a problem scenario and kind of practice that out and get a lot of diverse opinions along the way and train people. So yeah, that's a really cool vehicle, I think.
Awesome. Any questions in the audience? No questions? Okay. Well, I think we're pretty good to go.
Thank you,
no questions.
guys. Fantastic job.
Thank you,
Appreciate
everyone.
that.
We appreciate it.